What up, you guys? We are here for our Secret Teachings of Jesus episode. This is where we do our Saturday night secret sermon after midnight, and I delve into the Lost Gospels. We are currently in the Nag Hammadi scriptures, which were the Gospels found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. Another collection of lost gospels was found in the Dead Sea, which you guys know as the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's what distinguishes what the difference is between them. It's just where they were found and where they were discovered. And so I just thought, man, I've always wanted to read those, and I didn't know when I would have time to really commit to it. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we just made this a weekly segment as part of our regularly scheduled content? So here we are, and that's how we got here. So I'm not necessarily a theologian or anything. I'm just really interested. But I feel like we're pretty on the money a lot of times. And I do study Hebrew Kabbalah. And so a lot of the references coming through are references from that study. And so the Kabbalah is like it's like the spiritual, like almost technology of what is going on underneath all the layers of parable. And there is this like idea, like there's I can't think of like when you have like a word and each letter of the word means something else. I can't think of the grammatical term for that. But the word in Hebrew, orchard, has each letter represents the level of interpretation of the Torah. And so there are 4 levels of interpretation. And so you can read the surface level of the parable and the metaphor, and you can apply that to like mundane life. And then you go deeper and you would apply it to like the heart and the way that you are changing the way maybe that you approach your ethics and morals and the way that you interact with your relationship with others. And then there is the soul level where you apply that to the depth of the way that you want to change and grow your soul and elevate your soul. But then there's like the deepest level of interpretation, and that is the level of the spiritual nature. And that is like the esoteric, far out there, like metaphysical stuff going on underneath it all. And the most amazing thing to me about the truth of God is that it's echoed everywhere. It's shown to us in nature through the cosmos and the seasons of the year, and it's like the story of the coming of the Christ, and the nature of God is always present throughout the cosmos, and it's everywhere we look, and it's everywhere we read, and it's the same story, it's the same truth being told in so many different ways over and over and over. It's like the sun tells the story, the moon tells the story, the trees tell the story, the seasons tell the story, the history of the world and the things that play out. The events tell the story, and there's hidden truth even below the events themselves, particularly like with the High Hebrew holidays. It's not just in remembrance of the actual event that occurred, but the events that occurred during those times because there was like an open window of availability to the energy of God, the light of God, on a different level that we're not normally exposed to. So when the Maccabees defeated the Greeks, when the Greeks had come and dominated them and oppressed their religious worship, and they defiled the oils in the temples, and then the Maccabees were able to overcome the Greeks, even though they were just a small, like a tiny little band of warriors going up against this like huge army. It wasn't just that event that marks Hanukkah for us to celebrate. It was the fact that during that window of time, there was this miraculous energy available that's there every year that the Maccabees were connected to. And that's what helped them draw that extra light that provided for that miracle and all the miracles that happened surrounding that event. And same with the Exodus of Egypt and the parting of the Red Seas and all of those events. It was like they all were able to happen the way that they did because they were timed with this window of availability of the Creator's miraculous light on a more heightened level than we usually have access to. So every major religious holiday in the Abrahamic religion, particularly I would say Judaism, and then probably, well, it's hard to say that about Christianity because Christianity was later organized by the Romans and they changed everything to the Gregorian calendar. And so it's almost like the Hebrew tradition and the lunar calendar is still in alignment with those windows in time. So, I forgot what got me on this. We were really busy at work tonight, which was really exciting. It's been July's pretty dry for us at work, so to have a big busy night was really great. But it was kind of spent my energy. So, the deepest interpretation of the Bible. We interpret these things on all these levels, and so that deepest interpretation usually gives insight into the esoteric knowledge behind what is going on in the invisible realms that leads to the events that we see that we then remember. And then there's these stories around that where we're okay, we can relate to this, in what way are we like Moses, in what way are we like the Israelites, in what way are we like this and that. But there's deeper levels of interpretation that go deeper into that more invisible world. So the orchard, it's these 4 layers of interpretation. And so I guess I said all that to say that the Gnostic Gospels tend to lean into those deeper interpretations. And so it's particularly the Gospel of Philip, which we're in now, and we have been for a while. It's almost impossible for a person who looks at the surface layers to understand these texts, because they're so cryptic. And I'm not sure, I'm assuming that Philip wrote these portions probably they all took Jesus's teachings, the things that stood out to them in their own way, and they put them out there. And so I can only assume that these are things that Jesus had said that people weren't necessarily they didn't know what to do with these teachings. And maybe Philip, I'm not sure if this was a Philip that came later, who had studied under the disciples, or if this was the disciple Philip. But either way, we've been going really deep into the Gospel of Philip. And so there's these cryptic portions of text that are very esoteric. And the Kabbalah studies, they kind of focus in on that deeper interpretation of the Bible and that deeper esoteric bone structure of reality, that metaphysical reality, which has been really fun, and I've been really getting into it. So tonight's portion, I couldn't decide which portion to go with. There were 2 that were kind of standing out to me, and I think that they're really closely, they kind of go hand in hand. So I'll do one this week and I'll do the other one next week. And so usually what I do is I come in from work, I'll open up the Gospel of Philip, and I will pick out a passage that I just start getting these downloads, channeled kind of insights. And then I just kind of read it through, and then once they start coming, I just go ahead and start the video, and then we kind of unpack it together. And I just take it line for line, and I just word vomit whatever's coming through. All right, so let's get at it. So tonight's portion is called Accomplishments. And the reason being, I chose this portion because I felt like it was a little bit less, there was a little bit more hope in it for us rugged, imperfect people, to have some hope that we're not all so bad. So, accomplishments. The truth is, a person's accomplishments depend on that person's abilities. And for this reason, we refer to the accomplishments as abilities. Among such accomplishments are a person's children, and they come into being from a time of rest. Now, one's abilities come to expression in what one accomplishes, and rest is clearly found in children. You will find this also applies to the image. These are the people made after the image, who accomplish things through their strength and bring forth children through rest. So, it's so funny because this is the footnote that I found recently, and I didn't know where I had seen it, and I just had stumbled upon this note, and then here it is. Okay. So funny, because you're like, well, how do children bring rest? Children do not bring rest. They bring exhaustion. It's not the rest you think of. Okay, so I'm going to read this one more time through, and then we'll start digging in. Okay, so the truth is a person's accomplishments depend on that person's abilities. And for this reason, we refer to accomplishments as abilities. Among such accomplishments are a person's children, and they come into being from a time of rest. Now, one's abilities come to expression in what one accomplishes, and rest is clearly found in children. You will find this also applies to the image. These are people made after the image, who accomplish things through their strength and bring forth children through rest. So, rest, according to the footnote, is a term commonly employed in the Gnostic texts to describe the state of ultimate bliss. So the truth is, a person's accomplishments depend on that person's abilities, and for this reason, we refer to the accomplishments as abilities. Now, this brings up an idea that we talk about in Kabbalah, which is the fact that if a person goes through their life and they're good and they don't struggle with any darkness and they're light and they share and they're a believer, the upper realms are glad. They're like, good on ya. We like it. But it doesn't push the cosmic scales of reality a lot, because the person hasn't transmuted a lot of density. They're revealing light, but it was light that was already easy to give. It flowed freely, right? So basically, when we come to this earth, we have these soul contracts laid out, and we have our soul for lifetime after lifetime, and we bring that soul with us. And every time we come to earth, our rent for being here, our like the ticket to get here, is that we have this assignment that we've got to turn our darkness into light. We've got to turn our lead to gold, because the cosmos, see my scales back here? There's always this fighting there's always this fight between light and darkness for the ultimate power, right? And so the fate of the cosmos is sort of like weighed in the scales of light and dark. And so we each individually have our own little scale, but our own little scale affects the greater scale, the greater, bigger picture scale. And so a person who's already pretty even and then just kind of stays that way is like, okay, that's great. We didn't necessarily add to the darkness, but also you didn't like push the edge of reality. You weren't like like you weren't on the, what is it Abraham Hicks says, it's like you're on the leading edge or something like that, you're on the leading edge of expansion or something like that. But the sages, the prophets, right, you look at their stories and they had such complicated lives. They weren't like sunshine and daydreams all the time. They had their own darkness and sinfulness and struggles and personality defects. And they were constantly being thrown from out of the pot into the frying pan, out of the frying pan and into the fire. It wasn't like, well, I served God, so everything just goes nicely for me now. It's like, you are more powerful than that. So we need you as the alchemist to be changing darkness into light. We need you pushing the edge of reality into the weighing the scales on the side of good. And that can only happen if you take that darkness and you seek it out and you do something to change it. And so the cosmos loves a saintly angelic person. It's great. It's not making things worse, but they're not making things, like, they're not changing the darkness. They might be maintaining the stability by sharing and doing good. And so they are maintaining the status quo in a way. But what the upper realms really celebrate, and what actually elevates the upper realms as well, is when a person who comes from darkness is redeemed and chooses the light. And then they are able to change the darkness within themselves that would have perpetuated into oblivion forever. And they change that, and they actually take the weight off of the side of darkness and of evil, and they can move that into the light. So that the light then has more power, more weight, more stature. And it changes the cosmos forever. Because if we look at the law of conservation of matter, which comes from quantum physics, it says that matter can neither be created nor destroyed, but only changed, only transmuted. If we were to take something in this universe, whether it's good or bad, and then destroy it, say it disappeared, it would create a vacuum that would cause like an imbalance, and everything would just implode in on itself, right? We need that. Or else we'd cause like some kind of paradox or some kind of like weird vacuum, and I don't know, it would be sucked into the void. So everything is here and it's going to stay. And so the only way we can defeat darkness is by changing it forever into the light. So, for instance, the cosmos, the upper realms, the spiritual heavenly bodies and creatures applaud and rejoice when a person changes their anger and they give it up and they choose forgiveness and they don't look back. They appreciate the struggle that they came through, and they can value it as something that turned them into a different person. When a heroin addict goes through the darkness of addiction, but is then able to rise above that and break that addiction, that is one of the hardest drugs I've ever heard people talk about, trying to get over the addiction of opiates. I know that my older brother struggled with it for years. He wasn't on heroin, but he had opiate addictions through having been prescribed, painkillers and things that had those in them. And so then he became addicted to those, and it was the hardest thing to get off. And he actually was addicted to crack before that. So that was harder for him to ever break away from than, other, hardcore drugs. And so he had been part of that time period of the 80s and 90s when the government basically threw crack into the urban neighborhoods and enslaved the lower income class of people, particularly Black people. they enslaved them into crack and used them as part of, prison system support. They were like, okay, well, now we can keep all these people going into jail and keep them in the system, and like we can, let the system feed off of these people's plight, essentially. And so because he was, involved in the hip hop world and was really into that kind of thing, he fell prey into that kind of environment. Also, he had suffered abuse in his early childhood that left him vulnerable to that kind of thing as well. So I have a soft spot for people who struggle with addiction, because it's something that it's like a demon that gets a hold of them that it's so hard to break away from. But when they do, the upper realms celebrate, right? If a person who grew up with no faith, no hope, no reason to believe, they were completely cynical, and all of a sudden something changed them so that they suddenly believed, and they repented of their former ways of believing, and then they were able to have faith. They awakened faith in themselves. That makes a bigger difference than someone who was just raised in church and who took for granted the fact that they're like given their beliefs. And it's like when Jesus was on his mission, when he was approaching the public, he knew he had to do this very carefully, because he knew he knew what the ultimate plan was. He knew where everything was going. He knew where the timeline was going. He knew this was going to be to tear the world apart. He knew that there were going to be people that were going to be for him, and there were people going to be against him, but there was barely going to be any lukewarm people in the middle. And it was going to cause maybe even civil unrest. It was going to create enemies with Rome, and he wasn't trying to start a violent uprising. He was only trying to reform the Jewish faith and include others in it, but reform it so that it wasn't all legalistic religion, but that the spirit was awakened within people so that they could have a personal relationship with God. But in order to do that, we have to acknowledge that we are spiritually poor and that we have sin and a spiritual debt to pay, right? The changing of that darkness, right? That transformation. And so his plan ultimately in the beginning was to bring these teachings to the Jewish people and have them adopt it first, and then they could take it to the Gentiles as the chosen people. It was like, take care of the chosen people first. We are the chosen people of God. We need to get this good news first and take it in, and then, because we understand the principles and the foundations behind it, and then we can take it to the Gentiles so that they can receive it and understand it, in a more sound way. Well, what's interesting is that many Jewish people took to the principles, but they were also uncertain about it, and there were some of the higher up, like the high priests and everybody that were used to the lifestyle and the tradition and all that. It really threatened what they were used to, and particularly the way that people would come have to pay sacrifices and things like that. Like, this was all a system that was very much like, it would be like our ingrained way of life. Like, it was like their whole like culture and way of life. It'd be like somebody coming in and being like, I'm gonna invalidate this, it's not necessary anymore. And you'd be like, wait a second, what? Like, we're not gonna use the internet anymore? What? Kind of thing. So it was really shaking things up. And so it's ironic that he found that, like, even though the Gentiles were not supposed to be overhearing this message yet, it wasn't safe for it to like spread like that, because it was gonna we needed to contain this. It's gonna cause a lot of upheaval. It were the Gentiles that were so like quick to be so faithful that they would have these healings, and they would be like, oh my gosh, like receiving the miracles even easier than many of the Jewish people, because they were just so open to Christ's teachings, and they believed, and they were like, yeah, we've heard the rumors. Like, I totally believe this. Like, it was just easy for them to accept. And even Jesus was taken aback by it. He's like always like looking at his disciples. He's like, even this Gentile is like coming in here, and the faith on this person, like he's like, you have blessed me so much, because like I'm trying to like talk to my own neighborhood and they're trying to kill me. All the people I grew up with, they tried to throw me off a cliff. And, you know, here we are, like, you have no reason to believe in me at all. Like, you have no basis for the foundation of where I'm even coming from. And you're like totally accepting it with such an open, pure heart that like they're receiving the miracles. And he kept saying, like, it's according to your faith that you are healed. Like, yes, I have this power, this authority, but I can't force it on you, because you are a human being and a divine being that has like free will, and you have to claim that sovereignty, and you have to use that free will in order to receive that. I can't force it on you, and I won't. And so the fact that like the dark Gentiles, like the people in darkness, the people that had been making sacrifices to, you know, lesser gods and false gods and idols, they were like, no, I'm going to go with this guy. I know what he's talking about. I believe him. I can feel it in my bones that this is the truth. That was an even bigger deal than the ones who were like, kind of had a background and were like, all right, yeah, let's do this. Like, it was like a bigger deal, and it like elevated the upper realms because it changed so much darkness into light, right? So when we say that the truth is a person's accomplishments depend on that person's ability, and for this reason we refer to the accomplishments as abilities, it immediately brings reference to my mind about this value of the amount of density that you can change. It tips the scales, and it makes the upper realms celebrate even more than if a nice person just stayed nice and continued nice. It's just like, instead of just going on an even line, it's like we're talking about an L, like, you know, L angled 90 degrees, you know, it's like your loss turns into a win, right? You go from this to going up. And so it's like the pie chart, or like the line graph, like goes like that instead of just like that, right? When you're investing in something, you want this, not that, right? So you won't earn any interest if it's just like this, but you earn interest when the line's like that, right? And so that's kind of the same. The person's abilities. Okay, and so even that, what that translates to in your normal life in the day-to-day is that, say you have, when it comes to tithing, right? When we think about it, it's like, and when it comes to sharing, something that we give that comes easy is great. It's not bad. It still helps. But when we give in a way that's easy to us, we aren't overcoming our own fleshly desire to receive for the self alone. It's like spiritual, it's not like, it seems rough to call it spiritual laziness, because you're like, hey, I did something. But it's like, did you do the thing that was hard for you, or did you do the thing that was easy for you? Because for some people, doing an act of service for someone is something that they enjoy and they take pride in it, and they can easily do that, and it comes easy. So that's where they kind of lean into their ministry. But maybe they don't have very much money, and so when they tithe, it makes a big difference in their ability to like cover certain expenses. And so maybe for some people, it's harder to let go of their money, but it's easier to go do an act of sharing in an act of service. So it's like, again, it's not that you're not doing good and you're doing something, but what would make a bigger difference on the scales of karma and tikkun, what would really change your tikkun, which that's our soul correction, where we eliminate that darkness and we reveal more of our light. What's really going to make a dent in that tikkun healing is doing the thing that comes harder. right? Maybe for another person, they have plenty of money to give. And so they're always throwing money at problems, and they're throwing money at charities, and they're giving a lot of tithe, and they're doing a lot of things with their money, and they're a philanthropist. But maybe they have so much money to give that it's barely making a dent. They're not feeling the pain of it. They're not feeling any discomfort. They're not out of their comfort zone. But for them to go do an act of sharing, to go help someone build something, or to help someone clear something out, or like, oh, my neighbor's house got flooded and they need help with that. Like, they don't necessarily want to do that. And so the thing that would be harder for you to do actually makes the bigger difference. It reveals more light. It's a bigger blessing to them, but it also changes you inside as well. And it tips the scales heavier. So when we do the thing that is the harder thing, that is out of our comfort zone, that stretches us, that makes us feel a little bit of pain when we're doing it, like, oh, I don't want to do that. It's like, that's the thing that's going to reveal more light. Right? The person that, like, maybe like, oh, when we all have tikkun with our parents. That's why we have our parents. We weren't given parents that were going to be completely perfect. Even the parents that seem perfect are like giving you tikkun you have to get over because they were almost too perfect, right? They didn't give you a rough enough time. They spoiled you, right? So you got to get over that, And so we're having to forgive our parents, sometimes those are the wounds that are like the most personal. And so it's harder for us to let go of what happened, or something like that. So the person that's hardest to forgive, that ancient grudge, it's like, that's the one. That's the thing that's going to make the biggest difference. That's the very thing that you're being asked. It's the precious pearl that you don't want to pay the price for. That's the one. That's the one where you need to focus. So it's the harder thing that you do that shows that expands your ability, that strengthens your ability. So it's like this person's accomplishments is weighed depending on their ability. And it's like, okay, what am I capable of? Did I extend myself beyond what comes comfortable to me, right? What comes natural? Like, yeah, that's great. But like, and it's not saying like, don't use your talents and your purpose and all that. But what makes a bigger difference, what gets you like further, what reveals more light within you and also for others, is when you do something that doesn't come easy for you and it's hard for you, and you put yourself out of your comfort zone and you sacrifice the comfort of the flesh. You sacrifice the comfort of the ego and you put it aside and you put yourself out for the giving and the sharing. So when someone does something beyond what comes easily, it's a bigger accomplishment than if they lean into their strengths. So the truth is, a person's accomplishments depend on that person's abilities. And for this reason, we refer to accomplishments as abilities. Among such accomplishments are a person's children, and they come into being from a time of rest. So the definition of rest here is a state of ultimate bliss, right? So literally, it is a mitzvah for someone to bear children. And if they don't bear children, then it is a commandment that we are to steward or mentor a young person or a child or someone who needs guidance, in lieu of having a physical child of their own. So in a way, this is using a literal example as a metaphor. But it literally is saying like one of your accomplishments, one of your achievements in life on a spiritual level is bringing souls into the world and rearing that soul and developing that soul and stewarding that soul and being responsible for that soul. You don't own that child. That child's not yours. You are privileged to host that child, right? That is your borrowed child. The child belongs to God, right? But you are here as a steward of the garden. We are keepers of the garden, and the children are no different. It's like we are here to shepherd these children, but they don't belong to us. And so that's why it's important that people don't impose and project their absolute idea of what's best for that child, because that child has the truth of their spirit that comes through early in their childhood. And they know, in a way, in purity, kind of where their purpose is calling them. They have these pure instincts, but they get thwarted and told, no, that's not true. You know, they're conditioned by people who think they know better, right? Even the abilities, the psychic abilities of children are so much more heightened when they're younger, because they're so open, they're so pure, they're such pure vessels that they haven't had those layers of forgetfulness wash over them yet. I would see shit that would turn you stark pale growing up for, you know, up until my adolescence and beyond that a little bit. And it was something that came through my purity as a vessel, right? But as the world conditioned me otherwise, it was like there were like things that I wanted to, I had dreams and goals that were like part of my soul leading me into these directions, but it was like, you know, life and the world and conditioning and, you know, people's ideas and people's projections and, you know, parents that think that they know best and they, you know, they're not really listening, or they want you to fit into society, and so they want you to fit into a box. It's like they mean well, but they can actually interfere and put a bushel basket over that light rather than hanging it on the lamp post. So we need to be careful with our children, because it's a fine line, because we can't let them completely make all their decisions on their own, because they need to be guided and they need to be steered and stewarded and reared. But at the same time, you shouldn't discount nuggets of wisdom and truth that are coming through them just to blow it off, because you don't want to see that. You don't want that to be, you know, the case. You want them to go to law school. You want them to be, a doctor or a secretary, and just be nice and marry someone who will keep you, make you a kept woman, and you just be sweet, be quiet, and we'd rather you not be a weird prophet, you know, kind of thing. So among such accomplishments are a person's children, and they come into being from a time of rest. So literally our children come into being from that moment of pure bliss, right? And so that is that holy moment where the soul is brought forth through and infused into a physical being. Now one's abilities come to expression in what one accomplishes. So these accomplishments, these ways that we heal and change and grow and give beyond our comfort zone, it's like our ability then is stretched beyond what we had previously, and it's expressed through these things that we do, our good works, our efforts. And so it's evident in the change in us, right? And then the change and the effect that it has in the world. And if it's coming from an empty place and you're doing an act for the sake of, oh, how is this going to reflect back on me? Then it's not going to reveal that much light, and your accomplishment won't be like, there won't be that much there. It won't make that much of a difference. But the moving beyond what is comfortable to you, when you reveal light based on the fact that you wanted to share and not receive for yourself alone, but you needed to receive the light for the sake of sharing it with others, then that effort, that blessing, that miracle becomes like magnified, and it is apparent in the achievement of that accomplishment. So the good works that you do, the way that you grow, the way that you change, the way that you share with others reflects on your capability and your capacity to do so. But when you stretch beyond your given capacity, your natural capacity, and you raise that even higher, it's like you have these heavenly accomplishments that are magnified and elevated and celebrated in the upper realms, because the upper realms are then strengthened and made more powerful and more joyous and blissful because of it. And it helps eliminate darkness in the world. So now one's abilities come to expression in what one accomplishes, and rest is clearly found in children. And so there is great pleasure in, when people love their children, they have great joy and great bliss and great rest in that, right? They have that inner peace, that inner fulfillment when they love the children that they appreciate their children. It may not bring them like literal more sleep, but there's something in them that can rest. They can rest assured that they have given something, they have done something, and that gives them a sense of like, I've done my part, or something like that. Like, when you feel like you haven't achieved something and it just keeps nagging at you and you can't rest until you've gotten it. It's like that bliss of the domestic bliss, right? It can bring you a sense of peace and fulfillment inside. Even if you worry about these children day and night, like something in you has this sense of fulfillment in having them, I'd imagine, or is what this is suggesting. So now one's abilities come to expression in what one accomplishes, and rest is clearly found in children. So happiness and bliss is found in children. You will find this also applies to the image. Now we're talking about the image of God. We are made in the image of God. Well, we're not like spit out of our mom's, area. Perfect, right? We are flawed. We have tikkun to correct. We have these dark parts of our personality. And so, as we mold ourselves into the image of God, when we work to build affinity with the light of the Creator, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about building the vessel, strengthening the vessel. We're trying to make ourselves more like the Creator and less like our fleshly, earthly, animal self, going on these animal instincts and our animal motivations, right? The flesh alone is animalistic, but it's our divine nature that leads us towards the light, that leads us toward the inclination of wanting to do better, of wanting to change. And so through that, we do these things to grow and to heal and to change and to sacrifice ourself and to sacrifice our ego and the small self and the personality. And we sacrifice the soul in a way that actually elevates it and brings it more to life and to light, and makes it more like our spirit, which is that part of ourselves that is actually already perfected and completely whole and is in that image of God, that's like standing there as a mirror reflection to show the soul, like, this is where you are going, this is the map, this is, you want to follow me and listen to my call, and I'm guiding you because I'm making you more like the whole perfection of yourself. But this is something that we awaken to after lifetimes, because we're doing the work of transmuting that darkness on earth and in the cosmos through our soul, through ourselves. It's like the sin of Adam that we all inherited because we are all split off from the soul of Adam. Adam was the original soul of all of mankind, and Eve came from him, and then the children came from them, and the children came from them. Whether or not you consider this literal or spiritual, or symbolic, it doesn't matter. All of our souls originated from one singular soul at one point. So we are all here to correct for the fall when we separated from that perfection and oneness with divine, when we remembered the perfection of who we were before we were shrouded in these layers of forgetfulness and darkness and sinfulness. Okay, so you will find this also applies to the image. These are people made after the image who accomplish things through their strength and bring forth children through rest. And so this is talking about, in a metaphorical sense, the children that we birth forth is the rebirth of the self. It's the rebirth of that soul over and over again. And every time that we die to a part of ourself that is dark, that is fearful, that is insecure, that is lacking, that is in doubt, that is overly lustful for physical numbing and the pleasures that keep us lazy and keep us complacent, right? Every time we overcome that and reveal more of that true soul within and expand our strength and our light and our belief and our faith and our certainty and the love and compassion, that is the children that we're birthing, right? We're rebirthing ourselves, we're being born again. And so that is the good works that we're doing in that way are represented symbolically by the children that we're giving birth to. Finding bliss in that, finding rest, finding fulfillment. Because it's when we transmute all of those, that's the fear inside, the lack. Oh, I don't have enough. I'm not enough. There's not going to be enough. I'm running out of time. Buy now, but while supplies last. Like FOMO, YOLO, I don't know. Like, what are all these letters? Like all of that is just what we have going on. So yeah, we can keep that going and keep the status quo, but it's when we change that and we're reborn that we actually start to discover and reveal fulfillment within, with rest, with bliss. And as we let go of that heavy density, those burdens, the burden of our selfishness, getting ourselves out of the way, it frees us. It's liberating. It gives us so much more peace. I mean, think about how we're just like constantly just like always after something to pacify ourselves. Oh, I need this, I need this, I need this. And we're constantly dissatisfied. I can't get no satisfaction, right? But we get satisfaction when we put ourselves aside and we think about sharing with others and bringing more light into the world and changing that nature to want to be grasping and desperate and scrounging for the crumbs of life every minute. You know, what can I get for myself? How can I survive? I don't like this manna. I want something else to eat. It's like, if we can let that part of ourselves go, that's the miserable part. That's the dissatisfied part. That's the part that keeps us discontent. That's the part that keeps us miserable. That's the part that keeps us empty and unsatiated. And when we can move beyond that, when we can transcend that, then we have rest, then we have peace, and then we're giving birth to things that are of a higher nature, that elevates the upper realms, that causes them to celebrate, that tips the scales of reality towards the good. Right? We are trying so hard. Right now, you can feel the fight between good and evil. It's more like just magnified than ever. And it's not even that like one side is this and one side is that. It's like there are mixtures of people, the way that their perception is, the way that their consciousness is, and the way that they approach each other in life and the whole situation. It's like you're awakened or you're asleep, and you're either controlled by motives of fear and darkness and what can I get for myself? What can I keep for myself? How can I fight the other? How can I blame the other? How can I criticize? How can I judge? How can I cause separation? And it's the same on both sides and all sides of everything. But particularly right now, if you just look at politics as an example, one side isn't any better than the other. Everybody's, on a high horse and pointing out and pointing fingers and, in the mud. And there are also good people on all sides, right? And it's not all or nothing. It's not all black and white. It's not all that easy to reduce, right? It's more nuanced than that. And so it's about the motive of overcoming the personal agenda to reveal more light and unity and in pain and suffering in the world. That should be the goal. That should be the focus. And anything that's not in alignment with that is a problem, right? And people get on their self-righteous high horses on all sides of the spectrum. And so what we have to do is start putting ourselves aside and start thinking of the important issues at hand. I mean, how can we feed the people in the world? How can we end war? How can we give people access to medicine and medical treatment? And it's not even, we shouldn't even be thinking about the separation of borders and countries. This should be a global concern. You know, if we educate people, then there's less violence and less, probability for terrorism to rise up in these countries that are underdeveloped, or even in our own country, right? It's lack of education, lack of resources, lack of water, lack of shelter, and lack of medicine that put people in these desperate positions to be vulnerable, to be manipulated by people who are, offering them power or status or, revenge, and all of these things. They're falling prey because of their desperation. And so if we can keep the world, the basic needs met, and get everyone out of survival mode, then that would, can you imagine if nobody in the planet was, or at least a mass number of the planet was not in complete desperation, what change that would make? Oh my gosh, the brilliant minds that are probably in places where there's no resources to develop them. It's always in these third world countries that you see children making classical instruments out of garbage that they have collected, that they have built into something that they can make a symphony from it. Oh, wow. Look at us over here in the United States. We're overweight. We're complacent. We are lazy. We are fighting for the scrap. We're arguing amongst ourselves. We are doing nothing with our degrees. We are so spoiled, and we're not doing important things. We're not thinking about how to solve global problems. Now, that is a blanketed statement. It's not everyone, but as a society as a whole, we've become too comfortable, and necessity is the mother of invention. But if if people had the resources that they needed to just get out of survival mode, think about how much light that would bring into the world. Think about the probability of peace, right? And justice, and the Hebrew term justice was a term that wasn't just about getting the law, being on the right side of the law and winning, when you've been put upon. Justice was about everyone having enough to go around. Everyone is got a basic needs met kind of thing. That is justice. It's everyone is taken care of to at least that degree. That is true justice, where there's enough to go around and everyone has a chance to prosper and thrive. So let's read this portion one more time. Accomplishments. The truth is, a person's accomplishments depend on that person's abilities. And for this reason, we refer to accomplishments as abilities. Among such accomplishments are a person's children, and they come into being from a time of rest. Now, one's abilities come to expression in what one accomplishes, and rest is clearly found in children. You will find this also applies to the image. These are people made after the image, who accomplish things through their strength and bring forth children through rest. Let's do it one more time. Last time. Accomplishments. The truth is, a person's accomplishments depend on that person's abilities. And for this reason, we refer to the accomplishments as abilities. Among such accomplishments are a person's children, and they come into being from a time of rest. Now, one's abilities come to expression in what one accomplishes, and rest is clearly found in children. You will find this also applies to the image. These are the people made after the image, who accomplish things through their strength and bring forth children through rest. All right, y'all, that is enough for tonight. I hope you have a good rest of your day or night or whenever you're watching this. And then we will be back together tomorrow for our weekly energy oracle forecast tomorrow night. And probably as we speak, I am uploading our full moon in Capricorn workshop, which is pretty cray. It was totally fire. There's so much continuity there. And if you feel like you have inner conflicts, you're like, I don't know what to do. Like there's going to be so much clarity that comes forth in that workshop. It was really, really good. So it's already in the can. I just need to like edit that in the morning and upload it. So it should be, I don't know, up earlier than usual. That's for sure. So turn on notifications so you'll know when that drops. And also, if you like this video, please like it. Leave me a comment. That helps this video get out to others so they can see these messages as well. And subscribing to the channel always helps. I've noticed that I've got about like 11 to 1,200 returning viewers at any given time. So I feel like that means that I should have probably 11 to 1,200 subscribers. And I do not have 11 to 1,200 subscribers. So subscribe, it's free, it's just a button. Yeah, the worst that'll happen is you'll see my thumbnail on your suggestion page. So hopefully that's not too much to bother you with. So, all right, y'all. Well, I will see y'all tomorrow. In the meantime, peace be with you.